into the fire! That's right, folks. Let's talk about metal. Let's get back to the early days. I've already discussed the late 60s, bands like the Beatles and The Who, Jimi Hendrix, stuff like that. Also, I believe I already handled Led Zeppelin there. I mean, the first two albums were released in 1969, so if you want to consider them a 70s band, I can totally understand that. For me, though, the 70s, I think it's a very different time. In the late 60s, Led Zeppelin is kind of this really heavy rock band, and they're doing that stuff. But then in the 70s, with their third album, they kind of turn folkier, and it's not as heavy anymore. So I'm not really that much of a Led Zeppelin fan, except for the first two albums. However, there's some really cool stuff like Black Sabbath. They released their first two albums in 1970. Uriah Heep is a really cool band also. I think both of these bands deserve their own episode. Because I've got so many albums from them, and it's kind of a bigger topic. Also Genesis, the whole Peter Gabriel era, in essence, is kind of legendary. So I'm gonna save that for another day. But today, let's quickly look at some of the other bands of the early 70s. Deep Purple, as legendary as Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. A very cool band. This is my favorite album from them. I think this is the heaviest. The guitar sound is really rough. The whole production, almost the sound feels like it's breaking in many points of this album, but all in the right way. I think this is probably the heaviest Deep Purple album. It's the only album I have, but I would urge you to also check out Fireball, and Machine Head. I think Machine Head is probably the most legendary album from them. I just love the sheer energy and excitement that this album has. Songs like, well, Speed King is alright, but Bloodsucker, Flight of the Rats, Into the Fire, which I already kind of mentioned, Hard Loving Man. Then there's some nice bonus songs here, like the Black Knight, the single is included here, and some bonus stuff. I'm not a huge Black Knight fan, really, to be honest, but it's still nice to have it here. This is the anniversary edition, by the way. Then, something completely different. Todd Rundgren. This is a weird album. A Wizard, a True Star, from 1973. It's really trippy. Probably some drugs were involved while, making this album. It sounds really weird. There's like some really early electronic music here. There's some good, strong rock. There's lots of pop influence. But this is one of the weirdest albums I've heard, especially considering it's 1973. Definitely, if you want to hear something interesting and something you haven't heard before, get acquainted with A Wizard, a True Star, 1973, Todd Rundgren. He has a bunch of this stuff that's really like experimental, and then he has a bunch of this kind of heavy, pretty heavy rock at very least throughout the 70s. So definitely an interesting artist that you should check out. Then let's see the next one, ELP, Emerson, Lake Palmer. This is their album Tarkus. I think this is their second album. And it's one of those so-called super bands, I guess. You have three really insanely talented musicians. And I think Keith Emerson is probably the leader with the piano things and the keyboards he plays. It's kind of like rock and roll without any guitars. So that's really weird. Like, how can that even be? But that's basically what's happening here. It's kind of self-indulgent at times. They can be this really extensive keyboard things happening. So uh, it does take kind of, you need to concentrate a bit. But I do feel that the rewards are here. They were a huge band back in the 70s, and then people kind of, I guess, eventually got a bit bored with that. But there's lots of stuff here, and there are these little fun songs like Jeremy Bender and Are You Ready, Eddie, which are the like really short, fun rock tracks. So there are these little bits and pieces there to make it a bit lighter, that it's not so heavy-handed. But then there are these really epic songs also, pretty much on each one of their albums. Here's another LP or ELP LP, Pictures and an Exhibition, which is a live album, but it's stuff they never released on a studio album. So they basically, it's based on the paintings of, I guess the paintings of, well, I don't know. I'm not actually, I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused here. But some of these paintings, but also the music of this classic composer, I think. I thought it was Mussorgsky, but it seems to be Mussorgsky, the title. That's confusing me also a bit. So basically, it's like classical music, but they have turned it into this 70s early prog rock thing. Very, very cool work. Check it out. My favorite would be Nut Rocker right there at the end, which is of course based on the Nutcracker, but they just make it groovy and fun rock song. So, fun album to check out. And he is probably probably their most famous album, I guess, and most liked album, Brain Salad Surgery, where the Khan Evil 9 thing is basically taking most of the space. But all in all, I think it's a really, really cool one to check out. It's really intense, lots of weird sound effects and things happening. It's a really wild ride. But if you're into early 70s prog, yeah, I think this is a band that deserves some recognition. Let's keep with the theme of prog rock. Here's Yes. This is my favorite album from them. It's called Fragile. I really like the main songs on this one, like Roundabout, South Side of the Sky. Long Distance Runaround is pretty good. Heart of the Sunrise is amazing. So this is really cool. And you have this little bits and pieces there in between. I think all the 5 members have like written at least one song on this album. So the drummer has done his own work and the singer has done his own song and so on. And I actually like it because while it's kind of uneven, some of those guys are really good composers, some of them maybe less so. But I really like that there are different soundscapes happening on this album. It doesn't get too boring, and then these shorter pieces kind of leave some breathing room for it. However, on their follow-up, Close to the Edge, there's really no breathing room here. That's just 3 gigantic songs. And it gets really intense. I'm not a huge fan of this one, but I must admit Siberian Cut-Through is such a cool song. Based on that alone, definitely check this one out. But the more I listen to it, I guess the more I'm giving in and starting to like it. There are certain aspects of it that I feel are kind of going on a bit too long on some of the songs, but this is still kind of a new album for me, so I'm still listening to it, and it's probably their best loved album, so I think it deserves a place in my record collection. Then here's Jethro Tull. Aqualung. I think this is from 1971, if memory serves me correct. Arguably their heaviest album. And for the longest time, I thought this was the best Jethro Tull album. I've heard it ever since childhood. If you're into metal, you probably would recognize Cross-Eyed Mary. Iron Maiden had their own version of that around Piece of Mind era. So at least you probably have heard that song if you're a metalhead. But there's great stuff here. Aqualung, My God, Wind Up, Locomotive Breath. I think that's kind of a well-known song as well. Locomotive Breath on this one. And this seems to be some kind of special version, so there are some bonus tracks near the end. For the longest time, Aqualung was my favorite, but then suddenly Thick as a Brick just hit me. Like a ton of bricks, I guess you might say. So I think this is actually it's just when you put it on, especially the A side, it's so intense. They just keep going and going and going, and it's all so tight. I really can't imagine how the heck did they learn to even play that song? I mean, while they were like still writing the song, it seems it's so intense and tight, and there's it's definitely for me their best moments. Here on the CD version, or at least on this version that I have from 1997, they have like divided into A side and B side, but it's pretty much like one complete song, more or less, and it just seems so insane that they could write pretty much a 44-minute song that just works. I mean, some of the sections on the B side maybe aren't as essential, but I would argue that the A side is probably the best 20 minutes or so of a single track that I've ever heard in my life. Maybe I would probably put Rush 2112 in front of Thick as a Brick. Maybe also Supper's Ready from Genesis, but it's really good. It's really amazing. It doesn't feel boring at all. It really it grabs you and doesn't let go. You're like inside the devil's fist, and you're forced to listen to the whole song to the end. I'm really surprised they were able to do that. It's really, really amazing, and I've certainly underrated Jethro Tull. It just what what a song. I'm kind of lost for words here, so maybe it's good time to end. But that was the early 70s for me. I'm gonna discuss Black Sabbath, Uriah Heep, and Genesis at some point, but there you go. Have a good one.